Hi there, and welcome to another episode of The Divorce Couch. We're delighted you're able to join us, and at the moment we're doing a series of single episodes as we each tell our stories and just how hopefully our stories will resonate with the person that they need to resonate with. So today we're going to hear from Salma's story. So we're going to hand it over to you about divorcing in an Asian community, Salma, and your experiences.
Hi, thank you, Claire. Oh, in some ways it seems like such a different part of my life than where I am today. Although, it's only, I suppose, 5 or 6, maybe 7 years ago that I kind of started on that journey. And I think for me, the things that are important for me to share about my journey are almost like what led up to the point at which I decided to file for divorce. Because for me, I feel like although the divorce itself and how it panned out and the years afterwards was really, really difficult emotionally, for me, it was the run-up to the divorce that was actually probably the most painful part of my life. And I feel like there are a number of aspects from my past and from my childhood and from my upbringing that sort of really made that decision even more difficult than it may otherwise have been. Obviously, I can't go back and experience it from any other. But I think for me, I grew up in obviously an Asian, my parents are both from Pakistan. We're Muslims. My mum's very religious. She prays 5 times a day. She fasts. And during our childhood, she, would always be teaching us about our religion. My dad was almost like the other extreme. His mantra in life was, I want to be a good person. I want to be kind. I want to be honest. And God will not judge me on the things that Islam tells us we have to do. So we kind of grew up somewhere in the middle, whereas, my mum was there teaching us our religion, and but my dad was out there sort of, I suppose, being the person that he was. And it was never forced upon us. And then amongst all of that, somewhere in my early sort of teenage years, my family made the decision to move back to Pakistan. And that was a bit of a game changer for me, actually, because what we had experienced living in the UK as an Asian Muslim family was very different to the environment that we suddenly found ourselves in Pakistan. So if you think back, the people that came to the UK in the 60s and the 70s, many from very poor backgrounds, from villages, had been brought up in a completely different environment. And they came here. And for many of them, there was this deep desire to hold on to their roots and hold on to the things that were dear to them. And so it's almost like they were stuck in a little bit of a time warp. And, the way they wanted their daughters to behave, the way they wanted their sons to behave, the way they came here, they wanted to progress, but they wanted to hold on to those things, which were in some ways not relevant in, current UK life. And then we went to Pakistan, and it was completely different, because in Pakistan, people had moved on. They weren't holding on to anything as such, because they're already at home and they're progressing. And suddenly we're there and we're seeing this completely different way of life, where girls had, at least and for want of a different word, at least in the class structure that we were operating in, it was quite progressive. And, girls were had the freedom to sort of go out, had the freedom to attend parties. We had a very different lifestyle. And for us, it was suddenly like, oh, this is very weird. And, that kind of changed my parents a little bit as well, because obviously we were there to fit in, and we had a great life out there. And then I came back here for my master's and then I stayed here, and then slowly my family all came back. So that's sort of the history aspect of it. But I think there were certain cultural things that I picked up on when I was growing up, and then mixed that in with the religious aspect of it, which I now know had been misconstrued in my own head. So it was my beliefs that divorce was bad. You know, there's a line that I remember hearing so many times when I was growing up, that, you know, the most hated thing in God's eyes is divorce. I mean, that's like sort of a very sort of brief sort of overview of the sentence. Is completely out of context. Mm-hmm. And that's all I knew. I hadn't researched it. But when I got into my marriage and I suddenly realized that I don't want to be here, this is not for me. And I just kept thinking, oh no, but you know, religion tells you that this is not the way. And then you throw culture into the mix, where I didn't know anybody that had been divorced in the Asian culture. Even today, I'm the only person in my immediate family. And when I say immediate, I mean my uncles, my mom's brothers and sisters, and my dad's brothers and sisters. You know, this is probably about 10 families we're talking about. I am the only person that has actually taken that step and stuck by it. So it was a big decision, because, you know, culture was telling me that I had to be the good wife. And, you know, when I look back at my parents' marriage, you know, my dad's a great dad. Whether he's a great husband, that's debatable. You know, it was very much he was a provider. My mum was the person who was at home and, you know, the housewife. And, you know, dad would come home and he might be tired and he might be angry and he might be stressed. And mum would just turn the other cheek and go about and cook and clean. And, you know, growing up, I remember my mum saying, oh, you know, women have to adjust. Women have to take, you know, the good with the bad. Women have to do this. And I didn't realize how much of that was sitting so deep inside me until I started thinking about divorce. Because, you know, my parents had brought us up to be independent. They wanted us to be educated. They wanted us to take a career on. They wanted us to be financially independent. So in many ways, we grew up in a very untypical Asian family, because we were allowed to go out. We all chose the person that we wanted to get married to. There was no arranged marriages here, still aren't in my family. I think my parents are just like, no, you do that bit, you do that hard part. But I realized that I was so dragged down by these beliefs, even though they hadn't been said by my parents, but I had assimilated them. So when I started thinking about divorce, well, when my marriage started struggling, and I was trying to juggle my career, because my career was very important to me. I'd worked very hard for it. I enjoyed it. And then I was trying to juggle being the perfect wife, from maybe the example that I had seen in my mother, who was always smiling, who was always had dinner on the table, the house was always tidy. You know, she was like, without realizing that actually my mother wasn't juggling a career and this house, but I was trying to live up to my mum's ideals, and also my ex-husband's ideals of the ex-wife, the wife that he thought I should be, because he'd obviously grown up in a different environment. And I suppose the women in his community didn't work, and they did cook full-on meals every evening. And, you know, there was all these like restrictions, and I was thinking, but this is not me. This is never going to be me, because maybe on some level those things weren't even that important to me. And when our marriage broke down, it broke down internally much sooner than I think the rest of the world knew. You know, so we still went out and we still behaved like a family. My parents didn't you know, they knew that something was wrong because physically I started losing a lot of weight. I was very sort of aloof, and, you know, obviously my mind was always like going off on different angles. So they knew that there was something not right with me because I wasn't quite there when I was with them. But the shame of failure that I felt, and the shame of not being able to be a good Asian wife, just kept me in that marriage longer than I should have been, because actually what it was doing was destroying me on the inside, because I couldn't see that this was a breakdown of a marriage. All I could see was that I had failed the expectations that my parents had of me. I had failed the expectations that society had of me. I had failed the expectations that even my ex-husband had of me, because I wasn't meeting any of those. And I think that was, you know, and I feel like if I'd reflected on my beliefs and I'd reflected on what was keeping me stuck in that time, maybe I would have been able to reduce some of the self-inflicted pain that I put myself through during that period of time. Because in Asian culture, it is very much about, it's drilled into women that pain is what happens, right? You have to take, you know, you have to put up with it, you know, you have to, marriage is really hard work, you know, you have to kind of just keep going, just stick to it, you know. And I remember, because that's obviously what I'd seen my mum do, you know, she had some incredibly hard times through her marriage early on. And, you know, I remember hearing, obviously I was too small then, but hearing her stories as we grew up, and it was all about, my God, you know, why would you put up with that, you know, in terms of the families and everything that had happened to her. And it's only years later that I remember one time, now that we talk about it, my sister said to me, but you did exactly what mum had done. Mm-hmm. You just chose not to put yourself first. You just chose that you were just going to keep at this because marriage was supposed to be hard. You're not allowed to be happy. You just are there to be the mother and the homekeeper and the, you know, the I don't know, everything else in between. And you just sort of almost mimicked exactly what I had seen around me. And I suppose sometimes I still do. I still fall back into those old patterns. But I've recognized them now. And, you know, and this is in no way a complaint to my parents, because, you know, that was the culture and the environment that they had grown up in. It's what the only thing that they knew. But through education and through growing up and through these experiences we had of living here in Pakistan, those experiences were no longer relevant to me. But I didn't know that at that time, because I was so entrenched in living up to standards that, or beliefs, I should say, that I had assimilated, but were no longer valid for me. And that, I think, that getting to that point of saying, well, actually, I'm done, was probably the hardest part for me. Because for my ex-husband, because he was also from an Asian background, you know, for him, I think if I hadn't have taken that step to say, listen, I need you to leave, I think he'd still be here in this house, living two separate lives. Because as long as his family didn't know that we weren't together, that was fine, even though we were essentially destroying each other inside the four walls of this house.
Wow. That's such a powerful story, Salma. And I think we can all resonate with what we have seen to be normal in our lives. And we do outwork what we know to be real because of our experiences in ways that until we begin to see things for ourselves and start to become curious, that's our default. I think it's a human default. It's what we do because we don't know any other way. And I suppose, the thing that sort of stood out for me listening to your story is that you had so many factors, but the biggest influence was expectation. Am I right in saying that? Because I'm picking up that the expectations that you believed others had of you ruled how you lived your life. And the very first thing you said, which stands out so powerfully to me, is that secrecy is the thing that kept you there.
Yeah.
Because people didn't know. And I think breaking out to be able to say something to anyone that we trust, no matter who it is, whether it's a best friend or a mum or a sister, the first time we can talk to someone in our lives as being real is when that secrecy, almost like code, is broken. And that's when we can begin to shift a little bit. Because as you said, your ex-husband, so long as nobody knew, it didn't matter. But yet we don't believe our story matters. Then we stay where we are.
And in fact, when you talk about the code of secrecy, I held that to the bitter end. The day that my parents found out that I had asked my ex-husband to leave was because he went to my parents' house to almost say to them in almost like, because he believed that was not possible for an Asian woman to stand up and say, hang on a minute, I need you out. And this is an assumption on my part, but he went to my parents and said, this is what your daughter's just said. You need to go and get her to change her mind. And thankfully, my parents sat there and said, but she's an adult.
Do you know what I find so powerful, and I think it's so important, and I'm so glad we're doing these 4 episodes, because what you've just talked about, I was really also caught into your story, is so important to so many other people, probably in a similar situation. And you not only divorced your husband, you also broke free from a whole system that goes on. And I think there's millions of people, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in the UK, there's millions of people that have moved over to a new place with a new culture, with a new setup, and they're juggling their past, and now they're arrived in the new world. The children are even somewhere in between and maybe not have given the permission to be more the new place than the old place. So basically, it sounds like you have separated from 2 storylines, your own marriage and your culture, Pakistan, Asia. I mean, it's massive, it's huge, it's powerful, because I think it's so 2021. And I think it's so important that it's okay. So listening to you, Claire, saying it's important to speak to a friend, I wonder how difficult it is to find a friend in an environment they probably were also not so much pro-divorce, right? So do you have to have a confidant who says, it's okay.
Yes,
it's okay.
That's one of the questions
so many layers, so complex.
That's really the question that I wanted to ask you, Salma. Again, and it's I know I said the same thing in Simone's, but I'm actually quite fascinated about how people cope at the time. I mean, did you have any support around you? Did you have people that you could talk to about this, or were you working it all through in your own mind?
I think I initially started talking to some friends at work. I was quite lucky at the time that I'd been in my job for, a good 10 or so years. And I had a very good friend at work that I started opening up to. And I suppose it was because she was so removed from my culture and my family life, although, she'd been a good friend, that I felt like I could actually, there were 2 of them, that I could actually be honest about how I was feeling with, I have an incredibly supportive family, my sisters, my mom and dad, but I couldn't open up to them because I felt like I was letting them all down. So although they would have been, and when it all opened up, they were absolutely right there by my side. But it was that really lonely period where I was trying to battle through this on my own and find that strength to say, that's it, I'm done. I can't fight this. I can't walk this journey anymore. Can't, fight these demons. Because, on some level, I felt like because of the person that I was, in terms of, I had a successful corporate job, I had a nice house, had 2 children, they were healthy, they were happy. It was almost as if, do you really have reasons to leave because you can't fix yourself? I mean, that was the thing that was going on in my head.
Yeah.
Like, just because you can't cope, you can't fix this, and maybe if you were the perfect Asian wife, this would all be resolved. But that was never going to be me. I don't even know what the Asian perfect wife is. I mean, that's just something in my own head, which obviously I think is, that sort of image. It doesn't exist. I know that now. I didn't know that back then.
But I think, the thing that I know I resonate with is, if I didn't have a definite event or reason to hook it on, how did I justify? Because it didn't sound like it was an okay thing to justify me wanting more, or I'm going to use the phrase being happy. I would say it's far deeper than being happy. It's finding contentment, it's living with peace, it's all of those things. But I suppose happy is a word that we use. It didn't seem like a reason enough to make such a change that was going to impact so many people's lives. Mine, the children's, my ex-husband's. And that's exactly the same as your story. And sometimes we can cross all sorts of divides by that sense of, do we give ourselves permission for wanting more? Or do we stay stuck because we feel that we haven't got a good enough reason that we can hook onto that justifies our position to somebody else, because we feel we have to justify ourselves.
Yeah. And, in hindsight, I think I had all of those reasons, It was a very, and I'm not even going to suggest to say that he did this on purpose, but it was a very emotionally abusive relationship on many levels. But it was that thought that, well, that's what I'm supposed to deal with. It was about stepping up and saying, no, actually, I don't have to deal with this. And I think that came down to my beliefs.
Yeah.
That, that's what all Asian women put up with, right?
Yeah, but you know what? I don't know the numbers, but you know what? That translates probably also into the Western world.
Oh, yeah.
To put up, what the standing or no, not withstanding emotional abuse and thinking, no, it's fine.
Yeah, there's also the not wanting to admit something that you don't want to have to say, because it's not the life you want to be living in. I think, how did this happen? I mean, there's so many different multi-layers that go through this type of a figuring out process, becoming who we are and becoming who we want to be, and feeling that there is more. I think that feeling of, but there's more for me, I can be more, and in an environment where that's stifled, then you have attention. And that's what often creates the start of these journeys of what is that tension, and being curious and being brave enough and everything. And the thing that I truly believe to be true is that, when I look at us and I think, our legacy, our children's lives have changed because of the decisions we've made. And in my opinion, have become better lives because we're teaching them how to think and how to be brave and how to make mistakes and then own the mistakes if we make them. But things that I wonder, could I have taught my children if I hadn't walked the journey that I had done?
Yeah. That's very true.
And that was actually what you just said. There was a moment of sort of almost like a light bulb moment when one of my friends at work, I remember sitting with him. I remember the exact place we were sitting, and he said to me, I said, "Oh, but I got to stay I got to make this work because I can't do this with the children." And I remember him just looking over at me and saying, "I'm going to ask you a question." And I said, "Okay." And my children were quite young at that time. My daughter was 4, my son was about 8 or 9. And he said, "If you stay, what life lesson are you teaching Sidra? That she's going to go out into the world, and what is she learning about how women should be treated? And equally, what is Zach learning about how women should be treated?" And I think that for me, something changed on that day, because I thought, oh my God, I don't want that.
Yeah. And these are the things that we learn on these journeys.
Yeah, such a powerful compass. I think so often, if you're not so sure, but you're so attached, to what future adults are you, bringing into the world, ask yourself, is this, and this is, I think, so often where it goes wrong. It's basically that we want one thing, but basically we're showcasing our children in other behavior, and we know that from research that children copy the parents, right? And then all of a sudden we are so surprised that they turned out in a way. But what other guidance was there? And this is a very powerful compass, to make a decision. Is this really what you want to give them? The baton you want to hand over?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I feel much lighter now. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you. It's very emotional.
Yeah.
Well, I think we'll bring it to a close, and just want to say thank you all for listening. Thank you for taking the time to listen to our stories. And our hope is that parts of our stories will resonate and inspire people to know that there is a tunnel that you go into, and that when you come out the other side, there is a light. And we don't know what the light is, but there is a light. And we are all living proof that we have come through and not only survived, but we are thriving in life. And we have created new friendships and created new families with our children. And it has been worth the journey, every step. So we leave you with that, and we ask you to press the like and subscribe button. We would love for our stories to be shared and to impact people that need to hear what we have to say. Thank you for listening, and join us again on the Divorce Couch for our next episode.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.